James Baldwin, an American author and activist, he once said that children have never been good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. So a few weeks ago, I took Diana, my youngest daughter, who is almost 4, on a play date with my friend and her daughter. It was the first play date that Diana had been to in over a year with the pandemic, and we were both excited. She would get to run free, and I would actually get to have a conversation with my friend without a screen between us. The simple pleasures of life in 2021. Shortly after we got there, I heard a little voice calling out, "Hey, hey." And I turned around to find Diana was trying to get our attention. So I reminded her that the polite way to get someone's attention is to say, "Excuse me." So she corrected herself, told us what she had to say, and she ran off. A few minutes later, I heard that voice again. "Hey, hey." I turned around. I reminded her again of the polite way. Again, she corrected herself, told us what she had to say, and she ran off. A little later, I heard the voice again. Now, if you're familiar at all, if you've been around young ones, and particularly preschoolers, then you know how the story goes. Fast forward, sometime after that, we were at home, and I took Diana to the kitchen to get something to eat. When we got to the kitchen, she ran off. The next thing I know is, the next thing I heard was a voice that was calling out, "Hey, hey." And guess what? It wasn't Diana's voice. I'm originally from Nigeria, and where I come from, we would call that a typical case of "do as I say, not as I do." If you haven't heard that phrase or you're not familiar with it, then I would equate it with one that you'd probably be more familiar with. It has that, which is "practice what you preach." They have similar origins. And both phrases draw their origins, they draw on a statement that was made by Jesus in the Bible, referring to, the religious leaders of that day who were notorious for saying one thing and then doing another. It seems like, things, as I say that, as I make that statement, it strikes me that things are probably not much different today, but, that's the topic of another conversation. But going back to, to the story, imitation is a huge part of human life. It's how we learn in childhood, and we carry it with us into adulthood. In fact, in 2004, a couple of psychologists in the UK conducted a study, and they found that, humans are more likely than chimpanzees to imitate mindlessly. That was astonishing to me, but for me, it reinforced the power of example. You may all, we've all at some point in time or the other, right? We've been subject to the influence of other people, or we've emulated other people. We may not have, imitated their words the way that Diana did mine, but we model ourselves after people that we admire. Right? We carry around with us words of advice that we've heard them give, stories from their lives, or lessons that we've learned from the lives of those who have left an indelible impression on us. Examples have the considerable power to influence lives, to influence other people, and to impact lives. So I invite you to just stop for a minute and think about someone who's had significant influence on your life. It could be your mother, even as we celebrate Mother's Day. But think about that person, and then think about what kind of influence they had on your life. Was it positive or negative? Was it empowering or was it disempowering? I remember the first time, about 13 years ago, that I was asked to share some lessons that I learned from my mother. It was a Mother's Day weekend, similar to this one, and we were at church. At first, I have to admit, I struggled to come up with something because my mother and I didn't always have the best relationship. As a teenager, I thought she was too strict. I thought she didn't understand me. I was convinced she didn't understand me. In fact, I was convinced she didn't like me. I felt like she was always trying to get me in trouble with my dad because I was a bit of a daddy's girl, and that she was on a mission to ensure that I never had any fun in my life. In spite of our differences, though, I observed my mom's faith. I observed her diligence, her dedication, her perseverance as she worked to build a home for us while facing at the same time immense challenges from multiple sources. My mother's example left an imprint on me. And now, as I look at my life, right, I recognize, and my teenagers will probably attest that this is true, but I recognize that there's a lot more of my mom in me than I would ever have imagined. I like to think of examples as permission, right? When you provide a good example, you're giving others permission to choose the good. And when you provide the wrong example, you're also giving permission, but you're giving permission to choose the wrong. The capacity to influence is the reason that, who you are matters. Who you are is very significant because, it is a single greatest factor that affects how you experience the world around you. It affects how you experience relationships. It affects how you experience your work, how you experience, your faith, your education, how you experience successes, failures, and almost every other aspect of life. But more than that, who you are has an impact on how other people around you experience the world. Few relationships demonstrate that better than the relationship between a mother, whether a biological mother or otherwise, and a child. Now, who you are is best reflected in what you do. It's reflected more in what you do than in what you say, right? And legacy builders understand this. To paraphrase the words of another American writer, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who you are speaks so loudly that it drowns out what you say. People see what you do, and what you do determines whether they accept what you say. So, the things that we choose to do, right? They reveal something about us. They reveal something about us, and they provide other people with a window into our inner worlds, right? Which is where our values, our beliefs, and our convictions live. They can also act as a looking glass in which people see themselves through our eyes. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me put some flesh around that. Imagine that, someone says to you, well, I really value family. My family is very important to me. But that person never makes time to participate in family life. They're always too busy when something is always coming up. Well, in that case, what they say makes a lie, or what they do makes a lie of what they say. And eventually, it will send a message to the family that they claim to value that they are less important than whatever it is that is actually taking their time. we all have, we can all make choices, and we all have a responsibility to make choices that that align with what it is that we say that we believe or hold dear to. When it comes to determining, when we look at the power of example and the impact that it can have on other people, and when we recognize that it is real and that, our impact can be incredible, we have a responsibility. I read a few years ago, I read this, I was reading this book, and I heard that, and it said that the average person influences up to 10,000 people in their lifetime. When I read that, I thought, no way, it's impossible. That's an impossibly large number. But then I did the math. And then, I thought about it. If we only influence 10 people in elementary school, and we influence another 10 people in high school, and we influence another 10 people in university or the workforce, now that's 30 people, right? And those 30 people each influence 10 people who influence 10 more people. We would in some way have touched 27,000 people. Imagine that. If we only did half of that, that's 5 people each time, we would still be over 10,000. The scale of that, it's a staggering number. And it just reinforces that the fact that our interconnectedness, the interconnectedness of humans, makes it almost impossible to contain the impact that our lives have on other people's lives. So now that we know that, how do we go about wielding the power of example in a way that is good for us and the people around us? As with most things in life, I believe that it starts with awareness and deliberate choices. The first thing that I would ask you to consider, is what is powering your example? What are the influences that are on your life? What are you filling yourself up with? What books do you read? What do you watch? Who do you listen to? All those things are important. And the reason that they're important is because ultimately what comes out of you is a result of what goes into you. You can't give of something that you don't have. To be intentional about the example that we provide, we must first be intentional about the examples that we're following. To do otherwise would be to be like, the young bride who shortly after she got married wanted to cook a roast, or was cooking a roast for her husband. And just before she put it in the pan, she cut off both ends of the roast. So her husband, seeing her do that, was surprised and asked her, why she did it. Her response, well, my mother always did it that way. It makes the roast taste better. He held on to that. The next time they were at Mom's, he asked her about the roast. Now, Mom's response was no different than her daughter's response. Well, my mom always did it that way. It makes the roast taste better. Well, thankfully, Grandma was around, so he asked her about the tradition. Grandma's response, it was the only way I could fit it in the pan. So mothers and other mothers, biological and otherwise, again, all of the legacy builders and those who are passionate about this topic here today, I encourage you, as you go, wherever you find yourself today, whatever you're doing, as you go along the way, be reminded of the power of your example. Remember that your example has the capacity to influence other people and to have a significant impact on their lives. And as you think about that, make a decision to use your power wisely. I'll leave you with the words of Albert Einstein, who said, setting an example is not the main means of influencing others. It is the only means. Thank you.